All right, welcome to a very strange show, which I'm at a show, and I was planning to do a live interview with Fred, but it didn't work out. But we're still going to do the interview here. So, Fred, welcome to the show. Glad to chat with you again.
Same here.
Um, so, before we get started and talk about this project, tell us a little bit about your history as a comic book reader and as a creator.
Wow, yeah, I've been a comic reader since I was about 4, I'd say, when I came across a copy of my dad's The Great Comic Book Heroes by Jules Pfeiffer, which had all these golden age superhero stories in them, like Superman and the Spirit and Captain America and Hawkman, etc., etc. I've been a pro comics writer since about 2005. I started out a book called Amazing Fantasy. Has premiered some famous characters before, and they haven't been able to get rid of me since. I've done a lot of mainstream superhero comics like Marvel Zombies and Incredible Hercules. I've worked a lot for Valiant, like on Archer Armstrong, and I'm doing their Resurgence event this fall. G.I. Joe. I've done Assassin's Creed. I've done my own creator-owned comics, and I've also done a bunch of non-fiction comics. Most famously, the comic book history comics and the comic book adaptation. The current book we're talking about is obviously an outgrowth of that, the history of Roleplaying.
All right, so let's get into that. So tell me a little bit about this new project that's coming to Kickstarter pretty soon. Let's get into that. So tell me a little bit about this project.
I don't know if the audience can hear the background noise as loudly as I can.
Okay, I turned it off. I was trying to stream on my computer at the same time. I'm sorry.
No worries. You want to mute yourself while I'm answering? Just because I can't hear myself. All right, there we go. Good deal. Okay, cool. So the Game Masters, which is the comic book history of role-playing games, is exactly what it sounds like. It's a history of interactive games like Dungeons and Dragons, really starting with the earliest war games, including chess, and basically goes all the way up until today, basically. Baldur's Gate 3, I think, is the last thing we discussed. So we talk about these games on tabletop and video games, LARPing, miniatures. It's just got a fascinating history that spans centuries. And it's really the tracing of an idea from what started out really in the military as trying to actually simulate real life combat on a board, right? Which has expanded so much into the minds, the imaginations of the players, and really has become in our digital age, our online age, a way for people to really connect to each other on a personal level, socially, that does not require, with the phones. You're muted.
So do you yourself have a background in board or games other than just like? Sorry. What's your background with games?
Sure. So believe it or not, I'm known mostly for doing comics, but my very first published writing was in role-playing games. My very first published anything was this article for a role-playing game called GURPS that was in the Steve Jackson magazine, Pyramid. And then my very first book, like with a spine and everything, was the New Orleans Guidebook, which was a supplement for Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu game. And that was way back in the dark days of 1997. So I'm dating myself a little bit. I actually stopped. So I've been a big gamer since I was basically 10, I would say 11. So a few years after comics, my parents got me the D&D basic set. I stopped playing role-playing games for a few years, like almost a decade, when I became a professional writer, because coming up with stories felt like a job. I didn't want to do it for free. But when I turned about 40, I got a bunch of friends together of similar age, and we've been in a gaming group monthly that meets at various of our houses for about a decade now. So I've never really, except for that brief period, I've definitely been a role player longer than I haven't been a role player, you know. And so that's been super fun. And I made my groups play all the historical games. So we played, like, you know, games like Gettysburg and Diplomacy, which were the games that got Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax, the co-creators of Dungeons & Dragons, into games in the first place. Played all sorts of historical games like Metamorphosis Alpha, and believe it or not, the Ghostbusters role-playing game from the 80s was shockingly influential with it a very unique die rolling system. So yeah, it's been great. It's been super fun to research. I mean, look, it's a book about games. If it's not fun to research as it is to read, then what are we even doing here?
So how is it different? Is there a different approach you have to take to this than you did to, say, like Action Philosophers?
To a certain degree. I mean, obviously there's the gaming aspect of it, the actual playing of the games, which is super fun and different. But what's different is, like, in Action Philosophers, each one of those comics, and Action Philosophers was like the first nonfiction game book I did, with Ryan Dunleavy. Volume 2, the color version, Omnipotence for Dummies, should be in stores soon. We just got them from the printer, so keep your eyes peeled for them from Rocket Ship. Those are little short stories about these philosophers that basically date back to ancient Greek times. And even something like Comic Book History of Comics was linear, but sort of focused on like phases, right? Like Golden Age superheroes and underground comics of the 70s and stuff like that. This is much more like, here's an idea that somebody came up with. How do we simulate combat on a board back in the 19th century, and then have that evolve into a role-playing game? And then how did role-playing games themselves evolve from, you know, the murder hobo cliche, right, of a bunch of adventurers just killing some monsters and taking their treasure, and just really much more maybe sophisticated is the wrong word, but a much more nuanced activity and form of social storytelling than it is today.
So who are you working with, who are the other creators that are working with you on this project?
Sure. The person who came up with the idea was actually the artist, Tom Fowler, who I've worked with. A lot of comics fans knows Tom from his work in Books of Magic and Venom and other titles. I did Hulk with him at Marvel. We've done an image book together. He illustrated my second novel, which was this murder mystery called The Con Artist, which is set at San Diego Comic-Con. But really, this was his idea. I approached him about doing a book on the history of basketball, which was a book I did for Random House. Joe Cooper ended up being the artist on that.
We talked about that. You were on the show. That's and right. you wore your get up. You had your basketball, and you were really selling it.
I had my old cosplay on. That's right. I remember that. But yeah, so I approached Tom about that book. But Tom, as it turns out, like many people in comics, is very hostile to sports and had no interest in it whatsoever. But he did say, hey, I would be, if you want to do the history of role-playing games, I'd be much more into that. And then like the little light bulb went over my head. And I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. I was actually annoyed I did not think of that on my own. And then we started doing that. And 5 years later, here I am on the podcast discussing it. And Tom, I should ask you about other creators. Tom recruited the great Bill Crabtree, who you might know from as the colorist on Invincible and some other great books. He's doing the coloring. He's doing a bang-up job. And we might even have some special guest artists doing some stretch goal stories if we go far enough in the campaign. That's a secret.
So tell me a little bit about Clover Press, because I know that I see them a lot when I'm putting together the, going through the different campaigns. Who are they, and how did you get connected with them?
So, Clover Press, I believe, was founded by Ted Adams, who founded IDW, who was actually the guy who kind of personally recruited me and Ryan Dunleavy, and that's why Comic Book History of Comics ended up at IDW, and Comic Book History of Animation as well. And then what's funny is that Hank Kalans, if I am pronouncing his name right, I'm sure I'm not. I apologize, Hank. The our editor over there, he worked with Tom Fowler and Jeff Parker when he was at Wildstorm on a creator-owned book they did called Mysterious the Unfathomable, which is super fun. But what's sort of even funnier is that Hank was my very first pro editor in comics, because before the aforementioned New Orleans guidebook came out, I'd done an issue of Prime for the Malibu Ultraverse, and Hank was the Prime group editor there. So it's been a little bit of a homecoming for both me and Tom.
So as you are researching this, did you learn anything about the history that maybe you didn't know before, or something that surprised you or is very interesting?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be nice to say no, I didn't learn anything. I knew it all beforehand. It was all just living in my brain. But no, I mean, it's I mean, I could pump out a bunch of factoids. I mean, what I sort of found interesting is the real story of D&D is a thing that sort of started out as a pseudo simulation, even though it had fireballs and dragons, and it's really sort of grown into something much deeper and more about the social connections between players than anything else. And just how that came about, and how it was really they started to move away from the kind of rote, kill the monsters, take their treasure kind of format, and into a much more story-oriented format, where the interaction between the NPCs and the PCs and between the PCs individually was much more important. Really enriching the experience. I was fascinated by the fact that there's a connection between comics and role-playing games that's much deeper than I think that maybe most people realize. I did not realize. I knew the game existed and I had played it, but I did not realize that the Marvel Superheroes game from the 80s was TSR's best-selling game next to Dungeons and Dragons. And in fact, we forget now that Marvel obviously is huge in movies and TV, but their very first TV show was the cartoon Dungeons and Dragons. Marvel produced that, and that was their first show. A bunch of spells and magic items from Dungeons and Dragons are lifted from Doctor Strange comics, and in fact, the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons, the boxed edition, what's called the wood grain box from 1974. This is, yes, the 50th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons, so it's even more appropriate we're putting this out. The illustration on that box was a swipe from a Dan Atkins panel in a Doctor Strange story in Strange Tales. And a lot of the art in that original edition of Dungeons and Dragons was swiped from that same comic. Ironically, not just the Doctor Strange story, but also the Jim Steranko S.H.I.E.L.D. Story from that same issue. They took out Nick Fury's pistol and put a sword in the guy's hand instead. So yeah, I mean, it's just endlessly fascinating. I also found it really interesting, the story of Dallas Egbert, the teenager who famously disappeared, the Monsters and Mazes case that kind of really put D&D on the map in the 1980. That was sort of a very sad and fascinating story, that whole satanic panic era. But it kind of very similar to the comic book history of comics. It's very exciting to find those different connections and trace them all together. Like that's the fun part of the story, right? Is the journey,
It's not funny that you mentioned it, but I remember my older brother, who's 3 years older than me, did a social studies project on whether or not parents should allow their kids to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, is that right? What was his conclusion?
I can't remember what it was.
I hope it was yes. Yes, they should.
So you've done all these comic book histories of. Is there something else that you would like to tackle in this format?
Well, Chad, sadly, as we move into the middle part of the 21st century, I find that people don't like reality. And I'm not going to stick more with fiction from now on. I've been doing these comics for like 20 years, and it's really it's something that I find super fascinating, and I get a huge kick out of. And so far, based on the signups we've had on BackerKit and Kickstarter to the pre-launch of Game Masters, this is hopefully going to do very well. Knock on whatever this IKEA table is made out of. I don't think it's wood, but anyway. But I think I'm going to stick to fantasy from now on, just because it's a real struggle there. And I think in a lot of extents, when Ryan and I came out with Action Philosophers in 2003, it was really like something. It was just we weren't intending to be innovators or whatever, but it did turn out to sort of herald a trend. And now I think, to a certain extent, history has kind of passed us by, no pun intended. And it's just less, I don't know. I find that people, I think that, we have a problem in that we have a bunch of people who are detached from reality and are kind of avoiding reality as much as possible. And so that leads, I think, to the less interest in things like the humanities and history. So, but never say never. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, Ryan and I talked about doing the history of video games at one point. That could be kind of interesting. We'll see. I love video games. I'm going to go play them once this show is over. So maybe video games. I don't know.
So you mentioned a bunch of games that you've played. What are your top 5?
All right. This is a good question. Okay. So I was introduced to D&D when I was a child, like 10 or 11. But I'm not a huge high fantasy guy. Like that's not my jam. So top 5 games of all time. All right. So I'm just going to grab them off my shelf. Is that cool? I'm going to go do that. All right. So here we go. This was my early favorite as a child. And, I got it from a used game store in Calgary a few years ago. But yes, it is TSR's espionage classic, Top Secret. In fact, I have a creator-owned book coming out soon that's fictional that is based on a Top Secret campaign I ran with my monthly game. So Top Secret definitely would be number 5. Leaping forward too many years that I want to mention. The pandemic hit, and my monthly gaming group had to go to Zoom, right? And so I introduced this game based on these video games I loved, and we did a big campaign, and people just went nuts for it. And that's Dishonored. This is a bit more of an obscure game. The video games were pretty popular. They're currently owned by Microsoft, so Microsoft, get off your asses and make some more Dishonored games, please. But this is my introduction to the 2D20 Modifius system, which I absolutely adore. I think it's a fantastic new system, and I really recommend it. Let's see here. Coming in at number 3 is another oldie but goodie. Where is it? I just saw it. Come on, don't do this to me. It's a live show. We've got to keep the people entertained. Shit, I just saw it. What the hell? Well, screw it. You can see inside here. It's Metamorphosis Alpha, which is the second ever, which is the first role-playing game to. Here we go. It's a modern the Metamorphosis Alpha, which is basically it's the first. Its claim to fame is that it's the first game to ever proclaim itself a role-playing game on its cover. And it's basically a giant dungeon crawl on a colony spaceship where everybody's been woken up prematurely and there's been radiation. It's a giant planet-sized spaceship. The ship's flown into some kind of like cosmic ray situation, and everything's all messed up, and there's mutants and robots and weird psychic powers. It's fantastic. I love it. Okay, number 2 is a game I played really a lot through college. And in fact, really all through my 20s, this was my game. It's probably too granular for me now, but I really dig it. And that is GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system designed by Steve Jackson. I've played 8 million when you're like an aspiring writer, and basically you just, here's some rules, go make up your own game, kids. Like this is like my jam. Like I did like a cyberpunk game. I've done a Roman gladiator game. I've done a time travel game. I've done a million things with GURPS. But really the champion, my all-time favorite, the thing that I like made my Christian youth group play, which blew their minds. It's got to be Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu. Huge influence. Introduced me to Lovecraft at an early age. I loved this in high school. And now my players love it so much I have to like beat them with sticks to get them to not want to play Call of Cthulhu. We are doing a Call of Cthulhu Dark Ages campaign right now. So yeah, so that's definitely across one game from the 70s, one game from the 80s, one game from the 90s, 3 games from the 80s, one game that came out 3 years ago.
So when does the campaign launch, and can you talk about anything at this time about like what you'll be offering?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of goodies, stickers, and you know, there's a Dungeon Masters screen we're all very excited about offering. That once you see the art for it, your face will melt with happiness. The campaign launches in a little over a week. What folks should do is go to the the pre-launch page. Basically, if you just go to Kickstarter and type in Game Masters in the search field, it'll pop right up. I don't know if you could put it on the I don't know if I can give you. I'll give you the URL in the private chat, Chad, and maybe you can just share it with your readers. You can also sign up for it on BackerKit. I will drop that in there as well.
I'll include those. I can't do that right now because I'm on my phone. So
yeah, no worries. Whenever you get to it. And then here's the BackerKit link that's much smaller. But yeah, we should be launching the week of San Diego Comic-Con for some reason, which is when nothing else is going on, which is July 22nd, which is cool. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. It's gonna be a great hardcover book. Tom's cover, you can see a little hint of the painting that he did. You can get if you want to pony up the dough and you're fast enough, you can get that painting. Is actually one of the reward tiers, the actual one of a kind painting. But yeah, no, it's very exciting. We just basically started promoting it. In fact, Chad, this is the first podcast I've done promoting it, so we're that's right, breaking news. But the response has been great so far. I think it's gonna be really well received. I'm just really excited. We've been working on it, as I said, since about 2019. So I want to get it out of my life. I mean, I'm really excited for you guys to read it finally and for it to be over. No, I mean to come out. It's all good.
So as we kind of wrap up here, kind of give one more pitch for the campaign and where people can find you on social media.
Sure, if you can remember the name on the screen right now, Fred Van Lente, that's where I am on Facebook, and Twitter, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm going to blow my brains out of it to sign up for any more social media services. I'm done. Just no. And then the campaign is coming out. It's very exciting. And I hope people check out The Return of Archer and Armstrong from Valiant by me. That comes out next month. It's a title called Assassination. No, it's called Assassination Nation. Assassination. 2 words.
Oh, that's nice. I can't wait for that. I really love those comics when they were being put out. And when the campaign launches, we'll follow it every week on our crowdfunding corner over on comicwatch.com. And this video will be here. And it was a pleasure for you to be able to join us. And thank you for putting up with this experiment.
Yeah, no problem. I think it worked out.
All right. Well, we'll be in touch and have a great day.
You too.